It's a normal day in Hyosan High, and you're sitting in class waiting for the bell, thinking about lunch, your friends, and whatever you were supposed to do after school. Then a sick student stumbles into your classroom. She's bleeding from the face, barely able to stand, and from where you're sitting, it doesn't look like you're staring down the barrel of a zombie outbreak. The teacher calls for help, students crowd around, and the school does exactly what it's supposed to do. They move her towards the nurse's office. And just like that, the infection has moved deeper into the school. From that moment on, the school keeps giving your group short breaks that look safer than they really are. A classroom gets you away from the cafeteria, but it can't hold once the infection gets in. The rooftop makes rescue feel possible, but it can't make anyone actually come to get you. That's the situation we're dropping you into here. Hyosan High keeps pushing you from one shelter to the next. The problem is that every room has a timer on it, and the longer you wait, the harder it gets to move without losing someone. So today, we're putting you inside the student group to figure out when you actually had to leave Hyosan High School. And if you've never watched All of Us Are Dead, don't you worry about it. I'm gonna walk you through everything as we go. Oh, and if I butcher some of the names, I apologize in advance. It's bound to happen. Alright, so before we get into your escape windows, let's go over the school first. Because Hyosan High School has useful pieces to it. For example, the cafeteria has food and water. The upper floors create distance. The broadcast room gives you access to a PA system. The gym has equipment. The classrooms give you space to isolate from the infected. And the rooftop gives you a lay of the land. The problem is where the infection starts. All the other pieces help if the threat is outside and the students have time to lock the building down. But they become weaker when the first infected student is already moving through the same hallways, the same classrooms, and the nurse's office the school uses to handle normal emergencies. And unfortunately for everybody in this high school, the infection begins inside the school system. Kim Hyun-ju gets bitten by an infected lab animal in the science lab, and her science teacher Lee Byung-chan knows more than he tells anyone, and by the time Hyun-ju stumbles into class the next day, the school is already carrying the infection through its own hallways. That changes things immediately. Schools are built for movement, not containment. Once the virus gets loose, the layout starts working against anyone inside of it. The school still has useful rooms like I mentioned earlier, sure, but those rooms don't add up to a safe base location. Hyosan High School only gives the students short pockets of time, and every one of those pockets has to be spent creating the next movement window. Okay, so your first movement window opens before you even know there is one. And I know my regulars might be tired of hearing it by now, but for everybody new to the channel, the first window of an outbreak is usually the one most people will miss. Not all people, but most. Depending on the situation, of course. During window 1 in All of Us Are Dead, Hyunju has already been bitten, and only one person knew about it. And that person was her science teacher, Byung-chan, who walks in, sees what happened, and restrains her in the lab. But she gets loose the next day and stumbles into your classroom and unleashes hell on that school. From where you're sitting, the important pieces haven't quite lined up yet. You don't know about the lab animal, you don't know what Byung-chan did in the science room, and you don't know that the nurse's office is about to become the next stop for the outbreak. Window 1 is the last stretch where the school still has normal movement. The doors are open, classes are running, and the outbreak hasn't reached the cafeteria yet. At this stage, Hyosan High School still has every exit open. The classrooms are functioning, the students are moving normally, the school hasn't turned into a maze full of infected yet, so anyone who called in sick or skipped school before the infected student was brought into the nurse's office would be way ahead of the entire collapse. But if you're a normal student sitting in that room, leaving here is almost impossible to justify, unless you really didn't want to be in school that day. So a girl stumbling into your classroom and collapsing is strange, and it should raise questions, but it doesn't give the average student enough information to abandon school in the middle of the day. Nothing about that would lead you to believe that your school was about to turn into the ignition point for the outbreak. And that's why the first window is so unfair. It exists, but people can't see it. And that's the common theme across the series I've been doing on my channel. Alright, so window 2, this is the first window you could actually see, and it takes place in the cafeteria. By the time you reach the cafeteria, the outbreak is already underway. Students come crashing through the entrance in a wave, and for the first few seconds, the room has no idea what they're looking at. It just looks like people running from something. Then the infected come through with them. Students start going down between the tables, and the cafeteria turns into a crush of bodies moving in every direction at once. There isn't a clear path to an exit anymore, and the room is filling around you fast. This is the first time your group is forced out of normal life into a survival situation. Fortunately, you manage to escape through the windows, land outside, cross the school grounds, and use a truck that crashed into the building to climb up and reach the balcony that leads back inside the school. For a few seconds, you're outside the building with daylight, with open space and more than one direction to move. The cafeteria is behind you, the field route is already cutting off, and the school has not pulled your group into the classrooms yet. But the choice between going back into the school or escaping outside is a tough one, because the campus is chaotic, and outside the school, nobody has a clear picture of how far the outbreak actually goes. So at this point, I understand why your group keeps trying to get back inside. A building feels a lot safer than open ground, especially when people are screaming and running in every direction. But going back inside can provide false safety, because once you're in, you have walls around you, but it also gives you locked rooms, hallways, and stairwells full of infected, classmates hiding bites, and no immediate food or water plan. Basically, those walls come with a lot of downsides. That being said, Hyosan High School is becoming the local outbreak center. Every minute inside gives the building more time to fill up around you. But if there was one clean answer to when you had to leave, it would be right here, right now, before you decide to go back into school or turn around and head outside. There was a brief window when a lot of students could have made a break for it to head towards the edge of campus, towards the mountains, away from the heart of the outbreak, and areas that are going to explode with infected. In this situation, you're not looking for the perfect safe zone either. In fact, the show doesn't give you one. You're trying to avoid being pulled back into the building. So once your group climbs back through the balcony, you haven't only missed one of your best exits, you've accepted the school as the place you're going to hunker down in. And once you get back inside, you're dealing with the hallways, the stairwells, and the classrooms. Fortunately, some of those spaces do give you and your group a few seconds to breathe before the next problem forces you to move again. And that's why the classrooms feel like shelter when you finally get inside. The doors are closed, the mass casualty event in the cafeteria is behind you, and for a moment, your group has what looks like control. You are now away from the worst of the crowd, you're together, and for the first time since the cafeteria broke open, you can now breathe, until the infected teacher comes stumbling into the classroom. But to be fair, it was never going to be that secure to begin with. It only looked secure because there was a door between you and the hallway. But a door does not turn a classroom into a safe base location. Anyway, so the teacher gets inside because he's still treated like the authority figure, which makes sense. These kids have spent their whole lives being told to listen to adults inside this building and respect their elders. That's especially true for Korea. Respect is a cornerstone of their culture. So even during an active outbreak, that doesn't just vanish right away. Unfortunately, in this world, authority does not mean safety. A teacher with a bite is the same threat as anyone else with a bite. And once he turned, he proved that immediately by biting another student and forcing you and your group to flee again. So you get pushed through the hallways, forced towards the stairs, and surrounded. You and the students rip window frames loose and use them as shields, then a door becomes the only thing keeping the infected back long enough to move. By the time your group reaches the upper floor, the school is already forcing everyone to improvise with whatever is close enough to grab. And this is eventually how you reach the broadcast room. Now this is the first position in the school that gives your group more than just a few walls. There's equipment, a computer, and access to the PA system. You even find a drone giving the group a way to look around the school without putting another person in danger. That makes the broadcast room valuable immediately. You can gather information, use sound to pull infected away from certain routes, and plan movement without more than panic driving the decision. But even this room isn't perfect. There's no plan for food, no dependable water source, and no guarantee that the hallway outside will remain usable. This means the broadcast room is just a staging zone. The clock is ticking while you're in here. A staging room is somewhere you use to prepare the next move. A base is somewhere you can live through the next phase. The broadcast room can help you move, but it cannot keep you alive indefinitely or till help arrives. This is where a lot of people would get caught in the collapse. A position gives them one useful thing, and they start acting like they're completely safe here. Information can feel like control. A locked door feels like safety, and a few hours without immediate attacks can feel like stability. But this is absolutely a temporary position. Water will run out, hunger will kick in, the infected aren't leaving the building, human conflict is growing inside the group, and the school bully Gui Nam is still out there. He plays a bigger role, I'll explain that a little bit later. And outside the school, the response is already moving away from a simple rescue. So the broadcast room gives them a second major usable window. Once your group has tools, information, and enough organization to plan, the broadcast room needs to become a launch point instead of a waiting room. Since you have access to the PA system and the drone, it gives you a way to create movement instead of praying for a rescue. Ideally, you'd use sound to pull the infected away, use the drone to check the route, and leave before hunger and thirst make the room useless. The next collapse isn't the result of the infected, it happens within your group. Na-yoon accuses Kyung-soon of being infected, so he ends up being isolated, watched, and eventually proven to be fine. But instead of accepting that, Na-yoon intentionally wipes zombie blood into Kyung-soo's open scratch, directly infecting him and killing a healthy member of the group just to save face. This scene shows a different kind of collapse. The room is holding physically, and the infected are outside, but you still lost a group member to a person sitting right next to you. Walls only solve the problem outside. They don't help with internal conflict within the group. Na-yoon managed to do more damage inside a safe room than the infected outside in the hallways. So when the group ends up exposing what she did, Na-yoon runs out of the room in a panic. Miss Park follows to protect her and gets bitten, saving her life, turning one malicious decision into two major losses for the group. That's why internal conflict can sometimes be just just as bad as the infected. A room can have solid doors and still fail because the people inside are breaking down faster than the barricade. And in a survival situation, your only real currency is time. Wasting it on personal grudges doesn't just damage the group's morale, it actively burns the very window you need to escape before the building closes in around you. The next morning, the broadcast room is buying less and less time. Your group survived the first chaos of the outbreak, but now the problems are slower and harder to solve. Food is limited, nobody knows if rescue is actually coming, and every supply run means opening the room back to the school again. So this is where phones come in. Your group still needs to contact the outside world, but the phones are all downstairs. Chung-san and Soo-hyuk make the run, but the plan falls apart almost immediately. Soo-hyuk has to climb back outside, and Chung-san ends up moving through the school alone. He reaches the teacher's office, finds a phone, and runs into Gui-nam, the school bully, who has the principal tied up. Kinda funny that a zombie outbreak still can't stop this dude from bullying people. Then the situation gets worse. The principal tries to get away. Gui-nam kills him, and Chung-san records it. Now the phone trip is about more than calling for help. Chung-san has evidence of a murder. Gui-nam now wants the phone, and the whole thing turns into a chase scene. Chung-san runs into the library, but the room is already packed with infected. He climbs onto the bookcases to stay off the floor. Gui-nam follows him, and the fight ends up with Gui-nam falling into the infected crowd below. Chung-san gets away eventually, makes the call, but the answer is the one your group did not want. As it turns out, the phones are useless. The area is locked down, and nobody's getting out of this by making a phone call for help. Shortly after this, we see Gui-nam get back up. Somehow he's partially infected, and now moving through the crowd, which makes everything that much worse for everybody inside the school. Because the regular infected hear noise, chase movement, and overwhelm people in tight spaces, but Gui-nam can still think, talk, remember what happened, and go after Chung-san while being fully coherent. And that becomes a problem for the military too. Once they know some infected people can still look human, a rooftop full of survivors becomes harder to judge from the air. The students might be healthy, or they might be carrying the virus in a way the soldiers can't quite confirm from the helicopter. Alright, so window 3. If you can make it to high ground, you can gain visibility and distance between you and the infected below. It also gives the helicopter a clear place to find you if they're actively trying to rescue people. In almost every real-world disaster scenario, the roof is where you want to go if you're trapped inside a large building looking to be rescued. So when your group fights its way to the school roof, the plan is logical, until you find out that the door is locked. Chil-soo is on the other side. He knows there's students behind the door and he still doesn't want to open it. Then your group hears the one sound that makes all the effort trying to get to the roof worth it. The soldiers on the helicopter end up landing on the roof. They find Chil-soo and ask if anyone else is inside. He tells them he's the only one. So while your group is still trapped behind the locked door, the helicopter lifts off and leaves everybody else behind. By the time your group finally breaks through, the helicopter is already gone. The rescue point was right there, but a locked door and one coward on the other side was enough to waste that window for you. Then something changes. The military later confirmed there are survivors at the school, but they aren't only going back for the students. They also just learned that the science teacher's laptop may have information about the virus, so they send a team to retrieve it and plan to pull all the students out while they're there. So for a moment in time, there is still hope for the students on the roof, until Eun-ji attacks Chil-soo at the quarantine camp. Now the command has a new problem. If someone can be infected while still looking human, then survivors inside the outbreak zone can't be judged from a helicopter safely. The rescue now carries risk for the soldiers, and it's something they're not willing to ignore. So being on the roof still gives you visibility, but visibility doesn't get you rescued, unfortunately. So your group is now stuck on a roof with no food, barely any water, no shelter, and one main route down, and no reason to believe another helicopter is coming back, so that sucks too. The only useful direction from here is down, and the only thing worth waiting for is an opening that doesn't put your group straight into the stairwell full of zombies. Alright, so window 4. The thunderstorm is the final usable window. Your group has officially missed all the good versions of leaving. Until some bad weather rolls in, that is. For the first time since the outbreak started, the noise outside is loud enough to cover the group instead of exposing them. The infected in this show react heavily to sensory triggers. Noise and movement pull them. So when the thunder starts hammering the building, it covers the sound the students make. And for a few moments, the infected become less useful at tracking you through the noise. Your group can use the storm to move through the building and try to make it to a stronger position. This is the final true movement window. Your group manages to use the weather and makes it out of the main building, but not out of the school system. The storm finally gave the students cover to move, and instead of carrying that movement farther away from the campus, they end up inside another school building. At first, the gym looks useful though. It's separate from the classrooms, it has space, and it has equipment that can block movement, but none of that helps if the infected are already inside and your group cannot control the room. And sure enough, the room lights up and the place is crawling with them. So your group ends up getting pushed into the equipment room, but the following morning, the students use bulk ball carts as moving barricades to push through the crowd, which is smart, but it also shows how narrow the options have become from missing the earlier windows. And this plan almost didn't even work. If not for Anju's dad showing up and opening the locked door behind you, you were probably shit out of luck. Him showing up and opening the back door out of the gym, moving everyone towards the tennis court, and pointing the group toward the mountain road is pure luck, especially the part where he sacrifices himself. You can't count on somebody randomly showing up, bailing you out, and then taking one for the team. Outside of plot armor, it just wouldn't happen. And that's what separates the earlier windows from this unlikely one. An early window gives you a choice. An unlikely window leaves it up to pure dumb luck. As with most things in life, you want to make your own luck, not wait for it to fall into your lap. Although that can happen, but I wouldn't rely on it. Alright, so at this point, the mountain road is the only thing that still makes sense. In fact, earlier it was a very good option even. So heading toward it now, under arguably worse conditions, is unfortunate, but at least you're on your way. Because what we need the most right now is distance from the campus, distance from the infected density, and distance from the place the military is about to target. That's right, the military is going to start dropping bombs. Dense urban outbreaks usually end in one of two ways: successful or failed military containment, and if it fails, expect the sky to rain fire. The construction site is where the school's story finally runs out of room. Your group ends up here. Guinam catches up again. Chongsan gets bitten, and the military is preparing to strike. The drones start pulling the infected into bombing zones, and Hyosan High School is no longer being treated as a place with survivors. So this is the final collapse of the school as a survival location. At the start of the show, Hyosan High went from school to shelter to maze full of infected, then a rooftop rescue point. By the end, it's just another military target. That being said, Chongsan knows he's infected, so he draws the other infected away, buying the group enough time before the strike lands. Then the bomb hits. After that, the question of when you had to leave Hyosan High School is over. Anyone still inside the target area is no longer making that choice. They are inside a containment decision that was made above them, without them, and too late for most of them to outrun. Thanks to some rather thick plot armor, you and your group do make it out of the high school. You cross the mountain or reach the outskirts of the city and run into another horde. Ideally, you wouldn't walk back into a zone that would be full of infected, unless you had a damn good reason to do it. That said, someone in your group gets bitten, saving another survivor, turns, and the group has to deal with it before things get worse. So leaving Hyosan High helps, but it doesn't end the outbreak around you. The mountain route creates distance from the school and the bombing zone, but distance from where it all started doesn't mean you're safe. Even after reaching the military quarantine and being there for a few months, the survivors are still living under restrictions because the virus didn't disappear with the bombing. That's why the answer was never as simple as they should have just left and gone somewhere safe. There was no perfect place to go. There was only a position that bought time and openings that let you spend that time before it disappeared. Alright, so what did All of Us Are Dead teach us? The biggest lesson here is that survival doesn't always look like finding the safest place. Sometimes it looks like recognizing when a place has stopped helping you. The school gave a ton of options, but none of those options fixed the problem. They only bought time. So the survival lesson is this: when a place only buys time, spend that time while you still have it. Use whatever openings you get, but don't let temporary relief convince you that the walls have stopped closing in around you. So when exactly did you have to leave then? The best answer is still the cafeteria. That was the last realistic moment where you had seen enough to know the school was compromised, but still hadn't been pulled into the room-to-room survival inside of the school. You were outside and the outbreak was just starting. It wouldn't have been a clean escape, but at that moment in time, it would have been your best option even if it didn't look like it. If you missed that, the next usable window was the roof. You had a very short window where you could have been rescued by the helicopter. Then the thunderstorm was the final usable movement window. It wasn't the safest, but it distracted the infected long enough to buy you time to move. The problem is where you move to. That being said, the real lesson in All of Us Are Dead is how dangerous temporary improvements can be during a collapse. Every new position gives the students one thing back. A classroom gives them a door. A broadcast room gives them useful tools to navigate the infection. The rooftop gives them visibility. And the storm gives them movement. But every time the group starts feeling like the situation is stabilizing, the school changes again. That's why Hyosan High School keeps beating them. The students are always reacting to the last problem, while the next one is already forming around them. And that is the real answer to when you had to leave. You had to move before the position you were standing in started collapsing into the next problem. Alright guys, if you made it to the end, I appreciate that as always, and don't forget I started a new channel. I've got 2 videos over there. By the time you see this, I should have 3. And YouTube thinks you'll like this video. If you've already seen it, I've got a playlist of a lot more just like it.